Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. Thank you for joining me. I am very lucky today. I managed to score a small sliver of time with Kerry McDonald, who is working on doing what I advocate for every single day, which is building alternatives to our current education system. And since I do have a limited time, I'm just going to quickly introduce you to her, get her bio out there, and then I'm going to ask her a couple of questions. I think she's going to help us better understand something I go on and on about, which is decentralization of education. And so I'm really excited to have this opportunity today. Before we get started, please like and share this broadcast so others can benefit from what we're about to share. And if you're not already subscribed, please consider doing that as well. Kerry McDonald is a senior education fellow at FEE and host of the weekly LiberatED podcast. She is the author of Unschooled, Raising Curious, Well-Educated Children Outside the Conventional Classroom. And in addition to her role at FEE, Kerry is also the Velinda Jonson Family Education Fellow at State Policy Network, an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and a regular Forbes contributor. I am so thrilled to have her with me today. Please join me in welcoming Kerry McDonald. Hello.
Hi, Deb. So good to be with you.
Thank you. This is actually your second time here, I should point out, and I'll put a link to our previous conversation below. So you recently penned an article at FEE about decentralization, and I would love it if you would briefly explain what decentralization means in the context of education and why it's so important.
Yeah, great question. You know, when we look at education compared to all the other sectors of our lives, we see, sort of a very monolithic, largely monopolistic system of education that's based in compulsion, right? That we have compulsory school attendance laws in every state dating back to 1852, the first one passed here in my state of Massachusetts and quickly followed by other states, that mandates school attendance under a legal threat of force, and children are assigned to a district school that they are compelled to attend unless their parents are able to take action to pull them out for homeschooling or private education, or increasingly in states that have open enrollment and allow for public school choice. And what we're seeing over the last, couple of decades, and that has accelerated over the past 3 years since the COVID response in the spring of 2020, is a real movement towards decentralization of education. Parents got a glimpse in 2020 of what was really happening in their children's classrooms and didn't like what they saw in many cases, realized that they could do things better. And I think, frankly, were jostled a bit from their complacency. Maybe had to start thinking a little bit more about why they made the decision to send their kids to the assigned district school, or realize that they might have other options that might be more accessible to them than they originally thought. And they started looking at teaching and learning quite a bit differently. And they realized that in our, technology-enabled world, we thankfully have so much more access to information and knowledge than ever before, really at our fingertips. And we're able to learn from the best teachers in the world, often for free, through YouTube and Khan Academy and other online platforms that are free or low cost. And I think all of that led parents to start to seek out and demand different education options for their kids. We saw in the summer of 2020, the rise of pandemic pods, where parents spontaneously and organically just started creating these sort of self-organized groups of students or children and families in their community, and often hiring an educator to lead a curriculum or take turns leading curriculum. And that, again, helped to kind of catalyze this movement towards parents taking charge and being a more visible player in their children's education. And at the same time, we saw the increased popularity of school choice policies that enable education funding to follow students instead of going directly to school systems. And that has continued to expand since 2020. We now have 9 states that have universal K-12 school choice policies, where every K-12 student in the state is eligible for a portion of state taxpayer funding to go to education choice options that they want, that are aligned with their values and preferences. And of those 9 states, 7 of those states have passed these universal ESA programs this year. So momentum continues to build. And again, both of these instances of decentralization in terms of parent demand for different education options, and the growth and diversification of homeschooling and microschooling or learning pods, that was happening pre-2020, as was the growth in popularity of school choice policies. That was also happening pre-2020. But both of those things really skyrocketed amidst the education disruption over the past 3 years. So I think we're still just at the beginning of what is this massive decentralization of education.
Right. Do you think there's risk, though, in keeping the funding mechanism centralized under the government umbrella? So even though we talk about, public school choice, there's decentralizing the delivery of the education itself, but there's also decentralizing the funding sources, which if we look at other sectors of the economy, we see tremendous growth when investors and different, entrepreneurs and people are able to go and do their own thing, literally, like from the ground up, raise their own money, figure out how they're going to spend the money. Some will do it well and wisely, some will not, and so on. Do you have any concerns about linking the decentralization of the delivery of content with a still central bureaucracy of government, like school choice program per se?
Yeah, I'm a true libertarian. So I believe that the kind of ideal educational environment would be a fully free market in education without any kind of government funding, taxpayer funding, or government control. And I just wrote about this in my fee weekly email newsletter last week, about how I would agree with Milton Friedman, who, of course, popularized the idea of vouchers or education choice policies back in his 1955 paper on the topic of school vouchers. Milton Friedman, of course, the Nobel Prize winning economist, who helped to really advocate for school choice, for parental choice in education, and co-founded with his economist wife, Rose, the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice, which is now known as EdChoice, kind of the leading ed choice information and advocacy group in the US. And Milton Friedman, said in his book, Free to Choose, that, vouchers are a partial measure. That they don't get to the underlying funding mechanism of education, which is compulsory taxation, and they don't address compulsory attendance laws. And he said, we advocate going much further, and I would too. But we have to start somewhere, because we have a system
Right.
that's based on compulsion, where,
Right.
unlike other sectors that to your point, are fully focused on a free market system of private pay. We don't have that in education. We have right now a system that's funneling $800 billion a year in K-12 taxpayer spending, and that's rooted in coercion around compulsory taxation and compulsory attendance. So we have to start somewhere, and I think the right place to start is to move from the government running schools and running education to this more decentralized model of, okay, we'll redistribute existing taxpayer funding and take away some of the government's grip on education.
Got you. Now, one of the things I run into working with parents is a fear. I don't know if fear is the right way to characterize it, but they're accustomed to the largeness of the system, the centralization of education. And I think believe, although it might be just one of those premises we don't ever think about or check, that it's not possible to effectively deliver what children need on a small scale. And so when I talk about decentralizing um, education, I'm not sure people perceive that as a benefit the way you and I do, except insofar as, well, I'll have more control over the content they're taught, but I'm going to miss out on. And then they start listing things they think they'll miss out on. And I'm wondering if you could address that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say compulsion works, right? So, beginning with that first compulsory attendance law in 1852, it's really, I think, desensitized parents and made parents compliant, that government knows best. And of course, my child has to go to the local district school, and that's just what we do. And it's what I did, and I turned out okay. So we say, even though if I think we really looked at what that was like when we went to district schools. I went to K to 12 public schools. I think we'd start to question whether, that was really the case. So I do think that if we remember that prior to 1852, we had a diverse assortment of education. Obviously, certain groups were excluded. Women and minorities were excluded from educational attainment societally. But the options that existed were diverse, and there were a whole variety of choices, from public schools and private schools and charity schools for the poor, and homeschooling, of course, being the default. Apprenticeship programs were widespread as a stepping stone to adulthood. So we had this sort of diversely offered education ecosystem. And then beginning in 1852, Horace Mann, then secretary of the Board of Education in Massachusetts, the architect of compulsory schooling, considered the father of public schooling in this country, decides that we're going to have these compulsory common schools that were allegedly secular, but really reinforced the kind of dominant Anglo-Saxon Protestant ethos at the time. There was a really large anti-immigrant sentiment in the early to mid-19th century, mainly against Irish Catholic immigrants, particularly in Massachusetts. And there was this sense that we could assimilate these immigrants into this dominant culture through coercive common schooling. And, interestingly, kind of the history there is that many Irish Catholic parents said no. They said, we're not sending our kids to this, again, purportedly secular school that had the King James version of the Bible and Protestant, teachers and texts. We're going to create our own parallel system of parochial schools. And that, of course, set off this whole cascade of events and Blaine amendments that were passed in many states that continue to plague school choice efforts across the country, that really limited education funding, but they were focused around kind of this anti-immigrant, specifically anti-Catholic sentiment. So, I think if we can start to see that education can and should look different, that this is sort of an outlier in American society, that we have this monopoly system and this monopolized sector that is not at all representative in any other parts of our lives, right? Like, I often think about education in the same way that I think about what we find in the grocery store breakfast aisle, the cereal aisle, right? So when you go into the grocery store cereal aisle, what do you see? You have every kind of choice of breakfast cereal that you could want. You have granola and oatmeal and breakfast bars and pancake mix and all kinds of things. And you can find just what you're looking for that's aligned with your preferences and needs. Or you can go to a whole other section of the grocery store and get bacon and eggs for your breakfast if you want, right? You have so much choice, and you're able to consume and make buying decisions based on your preferences and values and your needs. And you can try to convince others, right, that small batch organic granola is better than Lucky Charms. And you can kind of use argument and persuasion to do that. But you can't compel your neighbor to, consume your small batch organic granola or your Lucky Charms. And yet that's exactly what we see in government schools. Government schools are inherently political. They are founded in force, and they require this battle of political will between individuals and groups of individuals to kind of create this tug of war between small batch granola and Lucky Charms, or any kind of breakfast cereal battle that you'd want to create. And that's why, it's not surprising that we don't see fights in the grocery store cereal aisle. the way we do in school board meetings, for example, because in the breakfast aisle, we're able to choose what we want, and we're not trying to force our will upon others. But in the school board, we're forced to fight and to advocate, certain policies that will create winners and losers, that will either push oatmeal or Lucky Charms, or again, a variety of different preferences there that others might want to reject, but are unable to because of that compulsion and that coercion. So I think maybe, starting to frame education, and specifically education decentralization, within the context of all of our other personalization and consumer decisions in our lives, can help parents to start to sort of recognize this mismatch between this one size fits all coercive government run system and the breathtaking variety and choice that we enjoy everywhere else in our lives.
Right. Well, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And I think another thing people forget is the downside risk of centralization. So, not just that you're deprived choices, but that if a choice is made for you, which is what the current system does, the monopoly system does, whether it's literally the physical location and the population of other kids and the population of teachers or the curriculum, if it's not only not what you want or would have chosen for yourself, but if it's bad. So in other words, if they did choose your breakfast cereal and it were Lucky Charms and that's all you had to eat and you developed rickets and cavities and like your kids were malnourished because that was what you were told was the nutritious option, um trying to change it to the small batch granola is that much more difficult, right?
Well, and I think it gets to what is bad and who decides, right?
Yeah, thank
So,
you. Who decides? Right, exactly.
so what I think is bad, you might think is good, and vice versa. And I think that again speaks to why we have these inevitable battles within school boards and with respect to government schools across the country, is because we all have different measures of good and bad. We all have different preferences and values and needs. And we should allow the market to meet those needs, which they're doing, again, in all other areas of our lives when they're not controlled by the government and are not able to do because of the coercive nature of government run
Right.
schooling.
What do you say to those people, and they're out there, who say either, "I'm not confident in my knowledge or my ability to choose education for my own child, even if it is decentralized, so I've been sort of counting on these so-called experts," or conversely, the experts saying, "You're not qualified, even if you think you are." And what do you say to those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's changing, right? We've had, again, this culture that's been accepting this one size fits all mandatory school assignment for, over 150 years. So it's no surprise that parents might say, oh, well, wait, now you want me to choose. What does that look like? But I think when we see states that have implemented school choice policies over the years, and especially more lately with the universal school choice policies that are being implemented now, we see the culture change. You look at states like Arizona and Florida that have had for years various school choice policies, mainly geared towards low-income students or students with special needs. There has been a gradual shift in those states away from just accepting your local school assignment to saying, oh, let me think about what I'm going to do for kindergarten. In states that have a lot of charter schools, for example, Arizona, lots of charter schools and has for years. Parents are used to at least thinking about different kinds of education options. And I think we're just going to continue to see that momentum grow, particularly now with the advancement of these universal policies. EdChoice has been tracking this, and they found most recently that once the full implementation of currently passed school choice policies in the states are fully implemented, that there will be about 20 million students, or more than a third of the US K-12 school age population, being eligible for a private school choice program that enables them to exit an assigned district school. So 20 million kids. that is game changing, right? Like that is where parents are able to say, okay, now I need to figure out what's right for my kids. And by the way, I have this whole ecosystem of entrepreneurs who are creating all of these different models. And now I'm in the grocery store cereal aisle and can figure out what's right for me and my child at that time. And if it's not, I can make another switch and choose a different option. So I think we're starting to see that. And I think it's being able to encourage and activate these education entrepreneurs, many of which are entrepreneurial parents or teachers in public schools. I'd say most of the entrepreneurs I talk to on my podcast are former public school teachers who grew just as disillusioned as many parents today about kind of the standardized one-size-fits-all model of compulsory education and wanted to do something different. And they're going off and creating these micro schools, these low-cost private schools, these learning pods, these hybrid homeschool programs. And so they're also helping through their own entrepreneurial efforts to promote these models and to market their services and to try to, get their customers in the same way that we're, again, making these consumption decisions elsewhere.
That's fantastic. And I've been, kind of keeping tabs on your podcast. There are so many people. It's really heartening to see. I think finally, what I would like to ask you about is any advice that you have for parents who uh, are finding it difficult to make this shift to either starting a micro school or thinking about that if they're entrepreneurial, or finding one because they're worried about giving up community. So what I mean by that is, and this is especially true the older the kids get, what I've found in the sort of alternative education space is if parents of very young children are a little bit more flexible because they they can take their kids to the park, or they'll do sort of little kid-like activities. Once kids get to be middle school or above, their children are making their own decisions more and more. And if they are coming out of public school and have existing friendships, it's like another hurdle they have to get over. So, and yet we don't want those parents to be, I'm one of them. We don't want them to miss out on the opportunities to either start something for that age range or take advantage of an opportunity that might be out there. But I find they're concerned about that, or they're looking for ways to find communities of people. What suggestions do you have for building community perhaps in advance of starting something, or to make you feel better about joining? Let's say there's a local acting academy and you want to go do it, but you're nervous. It's such a small subset. Will my kid fit in? Will it not be? What if they don't find friends? That's a big factor with the kids 6th grade and up, I'm noticing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, again, this is somewhat new in terms of the scale. Obviously, these alternative education models have existed for a while, and I wrote about them, some of them in my 2019 book. But there's just been so many more opportunities sprouting since 2020. So if you can't find what you're looking for in your community, maybe just wait, because it may appear sooner than you think, or if not, you can go off and build it. But I would say a few things. If you're in a state that has one of these universal ESA programs or a robust school choice policy, it's probably easier to find community because you do have this dynamic exchange between entrepreneurs and families, kind of finding the right fit. And you'll be able to have kind of robust social media discussions, Facebook discussions with families, and kind of learn what's available to you and what's coming down the pike, because these new programs are being constantly created. And still, even in states like mine, like Massachusetts, right, where we don't have any kind of school choice policies, I'm still seeing this entrepreneurship and innovation. I'm still seeing new low-cost private schools, micro schools, pods. And they don't necessarily have to be small, right? Like a micro school is sort of a catch-all term, and obviously micro, means small. And many of these entrepreneurs do try to create their programs that are intentionally small. But it's often inclusive of programs that might start off small and then become quite large. I think about an entrepreneur in the Wichita, Kansas area who was a former public school teacher, decided to launch a micro school, thought she would open with 30 kids, and ended up with 130 kids that first year because there was so much parent demand for what she was offering. I think about a hybrid homeschool program just outside of Boston, where I am, that in 2020 had about 20 students and has more than tripled in those 3 years. So, you may be surprised at what's available to you in kind of larger student bodies, if that's what you're looking for as a family. I think, again, you're finding these clusters of education entrepreneurs, like in South Florida, where there is this bustling ecosystem of education options, more than 125 microschools in the 3 largest counties of South Florida, serving more than 8,000 students. And many of those microschools are collaborating and getting together, and students are getting together and doing kind of shared activities or field trips and building that community there. So I think that it's worth just exploring and trying things out. Many of these programs have trial days or weeks, and kids can see if it's a good fit for them. Like a test drive when you're buying a car and you want to find just the right car that purchase that is right for you and your family. The same is true with these kind of alternative education models. And I will say, just another piece of this is what really makes these models truly innovative is that they are low cost. These are, the models that I document and that I'm seeing the most growth in are not traditional private schools costing many thousands of dollars. These are intentionally low cost, inherently low cost models. They were low cost when I was documenting them pre-COVID, and they continue to be that. That's what's so disruptive and innovative about them. And then it just happens that their tuition, somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000, for example, for a full-time microschool program in many areas, tends to be in that sweet spot of an ESA amount in certain states, which is still nowhere near total per pupil expenditure that the public schools are getting for students, but certainly within the price point of these microschools.
That's fantastic. So then you would say, so some favorite sources would be go to Facebook and check around. Are there other resources that you would recommend to people to check for these?
Yeah, parenting groups. If your listeners and viewers are in any kind of parenting groups or parents concerned about education, those groups can be really helpful. And just post there. I've seen posts in kind of general parenting or education groups that are typically state specific or specific to your local county, that say, I'm looking for an alternative education environment, or I'm looking for a low-cost private school, or I'm looking for a secular private school or a faith-based, put in your parameters of what it is you're looking for, a classical microschool or a Montessori-inspired microschool, whatever it is. And I think you'll be surprised at what you find. And if you're not finding it within that particular Facebook group, search some other ones. You may find in the comments that others kind of refer you to other Facebook groups that might be focused on alternative education environments. So they're out there. And again, as more and more of these school choice policies get implemented, I think we see more grassroots organizations sprout to really help families know what's available to them. I think about loveyourschool.org in Arizona that was launched by ESA parent Jenny Clark, and is really doing great work in helping to let parents know what's available in Arizona for their families. And so I think we'll see more and more of that as well.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm so grateful to you for spending this time with us. I know you have a very busy schedule. To the audience, I would say please check out the LiberatED podcast. You can get much more in-depth information about the kind of entrepreneurs that Kerry's talking about, as well as just some of the models that are out there. Maybe you'll be inspired to start your own thing. And I would encourage you to consider the long list of benefits that decentralization brings, like the supermarket model. If you need to reference something, I think it's a great one. And I just hope that people will look at all their options, even if you don't think you have them now, because you can make them. So
You can make them, yes. If you can't
exactly.
find it, build it.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you for all the work you do. I and most of my audience are so appreciative.
Oh, thanks, Deb. So great to be with
Okay.
you again.
All right. Take it easy. Bye bye.